Have you ever believed something so deeply, so confidently, that you couldn't imagine being wrong? Ethan Cole did. For nearly 2 decades, he had been a trusted voice in one of America's largest corporations, a man who had built his career on numbers, metrics, and the sharp precision of Western management. He believed leadership was about structure, speed, and strategy. Until one conversation, just a few quiet words from a Filipino woman in a glass meeting room, shattered that certainty. It started in Seattle, in a recruitment briefing for a new Asia-Pacific division. The executives were reviewing candidates for a regional leadership role. Ethan scanned the list: Japan, Singapore, Australia, the usual giants. And then, almost at the bottom of the list, he saw it. Philippines, candidate Maria Reyes. He almost laughed. "She's good," one of his colleagues said, "but maybe not quite ready for a regional role." Ethan nodded. Not out of malice, but habit. The unspoken assumption was one he had heard whispered 100 times in boardrooms around the world. Filipinos are kind, diligent, great team players. But leaders? It wasn't a question. It was a belief, quietly agreed upon. And yet, that same belief was about to be broken. A month later, Ethan found himself in Manila, attending a leadership workshop for a potential merger between their U.S. branch and a fast-growing Filipino tech company. He expected efficiency, maybe enthusiasm, but he didn't expect what he saw. The room was alive, not just with ideas, but with something else. Warmth, laughter, grace. When people disagreed, they smiled first. When they spoke, they looked one another in the eye. Not to dominate, but to connect. And at the center of it all was Maria Reyes, calm, confident, radiating empathy without effort. When she spoke, people leaned in, not because she demanded it, but because she made them feel seen. Ethan couldn't quite describe it. It was leadership, yes, but it was also something he had never studied, never taught, never even named. After the session, he approached her, curious. "You have a very unique way of managing people," he said. Maria smiled modestly. "We just try to lead with heart, sir," she replied. "If you take care of people, they'll take care of the mission." Ethan paused. Led with heart. It sounded soft, almost naive. In Silicon Valley, that kind of phrase would earn a polite smile before being quietly dismissed. But something about her tone, calm, assured, almost spiritual, made him hesitate. That night he couldn't stop thinking about it. How could someone so gentle command such power? How could kindness produce results? His mind fought it, but his heart had felt something undeniable in that room, a sense of unity, of shared purpose, of belonging. It was as if Maria had turned leadership into an act of service, not control. Weeks later, back in Seattle, the question still lingered. During a global strategy meeting, Ethan mentioned the Manila workshop. "There's something different about how they work," he said. "It's not just productivity, it's emotional intelligence, cultural empathy." A few executives chuckled. "That's great, Ethan," someone replied, "but emotions don't scale." The room laughed. Ethan didn't. He realized then that the same silent insult he'd once believed, the idea that compassion and competence can't coexist, was not only wrong, it was holding them back. Because while American companies were busy automating empathy out of their systems, the Philippines was quietly cultivating leaders who led through it. And then the twist came. The data. Months later, during an internal review, Ethan saw a confidential report showing that teams led by Filipino managers had higher retention, better morale, and stronger collaboration scores than any other region in Asia-Pacific. Microsoft had started recruiting Filipino project leads for cross-border operations. Amazon's logistics network in Southeast Asia was being run by a Filipino management corps. Tesla had just appointed a Filipino operations director in Singapore. Ethan stared at the report in disbelief. It wasn't a coincidence. The world was starting to see what he had felt that day in Manila. Still, Ethan couldn't shake one question. How? What made Filipino leaders so different? Why did they inspire loyalty not through fear, but through faith? What did they understand about people that billion-dollar corporations were just beginning to realize? He didn't have the answers yet, but he was about to find them, in a journey that would take him far beyond boardrooms and numbers, into the soul of a nation where leadership wasn't about power, it was about purpose. Because sometimes, the world's most powerful leadership lessons don't come from Harvard or Silicon Valley. They come from a place that the world often overlooks, a place called the Philippines. When Ethan returned to Manila, he told himself it was just business. His company had approved a 6-month leadership exchange program, an experiment to understand how Filipino managers achieved unusually high team performance. On paper, it was a simple HR initiative. But for Ethan, it felt like walking into a question that had no clear answer. The city greeted him with heat and chaos, but also with rhythm. The sound of laughter from jeepneys, the scent of freshly cooked food from a street stall, the sight of families walking together even at midnight. It was life in motion. It didn't fit into a spreadsheet. Yet somehow it felt right. He spent his first week shadowing Maria Reyes and her team. They were running a cross-continental logistics project, New York, Tokyo, Dubai, and Manila, each team separated by oceans and time zones, yet connected through something invisible. Ethan expected confusion. Instead, he saw order through empathy. On Monday morning, the team started their call not with metrics, but with prayer. "Lord, bless our work and our families," Maria whispered. Then she smiled at the camera. "Let's make today lighter for each other." Ethan blinked. Lighter? That was not how Western corporations talked about performance. But as the meeting went on, he noticed something uncanny. People weren't defensive. They laughed, they admitted mistakes, they helped each other fix problems before blame could even begin. That night, Ethan wrote in his journal, a habit he rarely kept. Maybe it's not softness, maybe it's strength in disguise. By the third week, he began to see the cracks in his own understanding of leadership. He remembered an incident during a warehouse crisis. A shipment delay threatened to cost the company millions. The American supervisors panicked, demanding reports and updates every hour. Maria didn't raise her voice. Instead, she quietly gathered her team in a small break room. Ethan followed, curious. "Before we fix the shipment," she said gently, "we need to fix our hearts." The team bowed their heads. "If we panic, we lose clarity. If we lose clarity, we fail the people who depend on us." It was the kind of statement that would sound cliché in any Western meeting room. But here, in that small room with the hum of old air conditioning and the smell of instant coffee, Ethan saw something powerful, calm spreading like light. Within hours, the crisis was managed, not by command, but by collective will. He couldn't understand it. How could a culture so gentle be so strong? One evening, while walking through Makati after work, Ethan met an older man cleaning the street. Out of courtesy, he stopped to say thank you. The man looked up, smiled, and said in perfect English, "Sir, we clean because we want our children to walk proudly." Ethan froze. It was a simple sentence, but it hit him like a truth he had long forgotten. Pride here wasn't about ego. It was about purpose. Every act, no matter how small, was done with heart. And then came the confrontation. During a board review call from headquarters, Ethan presented his early findings. Filipino teams outperform because of relational leadership. They connect emotion with efficiency. One senior executive interrupted sharply. "You're telling me feelings drive productivity?" Ethan hesitated, then said quietly, "Yes, sir. Feelings drive trust, and trust drives performance." The room went silent. Later that night, he sat alone in his hotel, the city lights reflecting on the glass. He wasn't sure if he had just jeopardized his career. But deep down, something in him was awakening. A sense that maybe the world had been measuring leadership with the wrong ruler all along. In the following months, Ethan immersed himself deeper into the Filipino work culture. He joined morning stand-ups, birthdays, even Sunday gatherings. What surprised him most wasn't the discipline or skill, those he expected. It was the spirit, the quiet resilience in how people smiled even when power outages struck, the way they helped each other without being asked, the way no task was beneath anyone. He saw young managers staying late to mentor their interns. He saw executives pausing a meeting to comfort a crying employee. He saw leaders who carried authority like a gift, not a weapon. And somewhere between those ordinary moments, Ethan began to change. He found himself listening more, rushing less, choosing words with empathy. It was subtle at first, but unmistakable. The very culture he came to study was quietly reshaping him. One evening, Maria asked him over dinner, "You Americans are known for efficiency. We Filipinos are known for empathy. But what if leadership is not one or the other? What if it's both?" Ethan smiled. "Maybe that's why the world needs the Philippines," he said softly. Maria looked at him, eyes calm and knowing. "Maybe that's why you're here." For a long time, Ethan didn't reply. He simply watched the night skyline of Manila. Lights flickering against the horizon, humble yet radiant. The thought wouldn't leave him. Could the Philippines really be the bridge between two worlds? The day it truly changed for Ethan was a Tuesday, and nothing about it looked special. The sun was hot, the traffic loud, and his inbox overflowing. But that morning, he visited a small office in Quezon City, one of the satellite hubs of their expanding operation. It wasn't fancy. No glass walls, no ergonomic chairs, no digital dashboards, just rows of desks, old computers, and laughter echoing through the room like music. He was there to observe a new leadership trainee named Joel, a 30-something father of two who had just been promoted from customer service to team lead. By American standards, Joel didn't look like a leader. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his smile a little shy. But the way his team responded to him was astonishing. They didn't just listen, they leaned in. Every instruction he gave came wrapped in warmth. Every correction was followed by encouragement. At one point, an intern made a serious mistake that caused a delay in shipment tracking. Ethan expected a reprimand. Instead, Joel walked over, put a hand on the young man's shoulder, and said softly, "It's okay. Next time we'll do it together." There was no shame, no punishment, just calm. Ethan watched as the intern straightened up, wiped his eyes, and worked twice as hard to fix the issue. That moment stayed with him, because in every leadership seminar he had ever attended in the U.S., he'd been told that accountability required toughness, that leaders had to push people to perform. But here, in a modest Manila office, Ethan was seeing something radical. Leadership that lifted instead of pushed. Later that afternoon, Maria joined him for coffee downstairs. Ethan confessed what he had seen. "It's different," he said. "They lead with grace, not pressure. And somehow it works." Maria smiled. "You see, sir, in our culture, shame hurts more than failure. So we lead with understanding. Because when people feel seen, they grow stronger." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. And yet, he said quietly, the results are world-class. Maria nodded. That's because we don't separate the heart from the mind. We believe leadership isn't just about systems, it's about souls. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. Something in him was beginning to shift, slowly, like the turning of a tide. In the following weeks, he traveled across the Philippines, visiting company branches from Cebu to Davao. Everywhere, he saw the same pattern: humility at the top, harmony in the middle, and hope at the base. A call center agent in Davao told him, "We work hard because our leaders pray for us." A factory supervisor in Cebu said, "We take care of our people because they are family." Ethan wrote everything down in his journal, every quote, every smile. It was as if each city gave him a new definition of leadership. One weekend, Maria invited him to her hometown in Pampanga for her mother's birthday. Ethan hesitated. Executives didn't usually attend family gatherings, but something inside told him to go. The drive was long, the air heavy with the scent of sugarcane and rain. When they arrived, he was met not with formality, but with open arms. Children ran around barefoot, elders smiled from the porch, and the table was filled with food. Too much food. He tried to protest politely, but Maria's mother laughed. "Eat, son. You've traveled far." "You are family now?" Ethan didn't know what to say. For the first time in years, he felt something rare. Belonging without effort. No title, no position, just connection. That night, as they gathered for a simple prayer before dinner, he looked around the room. There were no grand speeches, no management jargon, just gratitude. Gratitude for food, for work, for one another. And in that quiet moment, something inside him broke open. He realized that the leadership he'd been studying wasn't a strategy. It was a culture, a way of living. The Philippines didn't teach leadership, it lived it. The next morning, Maria's mother handed Ethan a small rosary before he left. "For protection," she said, "but also to remind you, to lead with your heart." He held it tightly. He didn't consider himself religious, but somehow the gesture felt sacred. On the flight back to Manila, he looked out the window at the islands below, tiny pieces of land floating in endless blue, and thought, maybe that's what Filipino leadership is. Small islands of kindness in a vast competitive world. When he landed, there was an email waiting from headquarters. "Need your preliminary report on leadership assessment. Expecting quantitative analysis." Ethan sighed. He knew the numbers by heart: retention rates, productivity scores, cultural engagement. But how could he quantify what he'd seen? How do you measure sincerity or compassion or the quiet power of a smile that can heal a tired soul? He began to write anyway. But this time, the report wasn't just about metrics. It was about humanity. About why companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and Tesla were hiring Filipino leaders, not because they were cheaper or easier to manage, but because they represented something rare in the modern corporate world: the union of compassion and competence. As he typed the final line, he paused, staring at the words on his screen. Filipino leadership works because it is not built on authority. It is built on trust. And trust, once earned, never expires. He leaned back, exhaled slowly, and smiled. For the first time in his career, Ethan realized he wasn't just observing leadership. He was learning it. By the 4th month of his stay, Ethan no longer felt like an observer. He had become part of something much larger, something he couldn't define, but could deeply feel. The rhythm of Manila had found its way into his heartbeat. He started greeting guards with a sincere, "Good morning, Kuya." He learned to wait through traffic with patience instead of frustration. He even stopped checking his watch every 5 minutes. The city, with all its chaos, had taught him stillness. One afternoon, during a typhoon that battered the capital with rain, the office lost power. The screens went black, the lights flickered, and for a brief moment, everything stopped. Ethan looked around, expecting panic. Deadlines were looming, clients waiting, but no one seemed afraid. Instead, someone lit a candle. Then another. And within minutes, the darkened office glowed with soft, golden light. Maria smiled and said, "Let's take this moment to pray for those whose homes might be flooded." The entire team bowed their heads. Ethan watched, silent. He wasn't used to mixing work with faith. It felt too personal, too intimate. But here, it wasn't about religion. It was about humanity. In that dim room, with thunder rumbling outside, he realized that these people didn't just work for a living. They worked for life itself. Afterward, they sang quietly, waiting for the power to return. A love song, then laughter, then stories. When the lights finally came back on, nobody rushed to their desks. They simply smiled and picked up where they left off, as if nothing had happened. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. That storm didn't slow them down, it brought them closer. That evening, as they left the office, he asked Maria, "How do you all stay so calm, so hopeful?" She looked at him gently. "Because we've been through worse, sir. Hope is the one thing we never lose. It's our way of surviving." Her words sank deep. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about every face he'd seen that day, faces that carried stories of struggle, yet still smiled as if joy was a choice, not a consequence. He thought about the janitor who hummed hymns while mopping the floor, the mother of 3 who worked overtime but never complained, the security guard who offered him an umbrella before taking his own shift in the rain. He saw in them something the corporate world had long forgotten: dignity in humility. Weeks later, Ethan was invited to speak at a local university's business forum. He stood before a room of young Filipino students eager to learn about global leadership. He began with what he thought would be a technical lecture, but halfway through, his voice trembled. "In America," he said, "we're taught that leadership means being the smartest person in the room. But here, I've learned that true leadership means being the kindest person in the room." The audience went silent. Then, one student raised her hand and asked, "Sir, what surprised you the most about Filipino leaders?" Ethan smiled, eyes glistening. "That they lead not for recognition but for responsibility. They lead because someone has to keep the light on, even when it's dark." He paused, looked at the sea of young faces before him, and added softly, "And maybe that's what the world needs right now. Leaders who serve with heart, not ego." After the talk, several students came up to thank him. One of them, a shy young man, said, "Sir, my father works as a team supervisor for an American company. He always tells me, 'We don't lead to impress, we lead to uplift.' Thank you for seeing that." Ethan nodded, holding back tears. That was the moment he understood the essence of Filipino leadership. It wasn't about hierarchy, it was about harmony, a quiet, enduring balance between humility and excellence, between prayer and performance, between warmth and wisdom. The next day, Ethan visited a community center his company had been sponsoring in Tondo. It was run by volunteers, mostly young professionals from the company. They taught children, shared meals, and fixed broken computers. Ethan joined them, helping paint a classroom wall. As he dipped his brush into the pale yellow paint, a small boy tugged on his sleeve. "Sir," the boy said, "are you the boss?" Ethan laughed softly. "No, kid, not here." The boy grinned. "Then your family." For a second, Ethan froze. Family. That word carried more meaning than any title he had ever held. He looked around the small, sunlit room, at the laughter, the shared work, the joy that seemed to live in the air, and realized that this was leadership, pure and unadorned, to be part of something, not above it. Later, walking back to his car, the sounds of the city surrounding him, Ethan whispered to himself, "I've never seen anything like this anywhere else." He wasn't exaggerating. It wasn't the systems or the strategies. It was the spirit. The Philippines had shown him that leadership was not about managing tasks, but nurturing souls. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something deeper than success. He felt peace. When Ethan returned to Seattle, the city felt colder. Not just in weather, but in spirit. The glass towers stood tall and unfeeling. The streets buzzed with people rushing toward somewhere, but rarely toward someone. Inside his company's headquarters, the pace was relentless. Meetings stacked on meetings, performance charts flashing across giant screens, voices debating metrics but never meaning. He sat once again in that same boardroom where it all began, where months earlier he had first seen Maria Reyes's name buried at the bottom of a list. But this time, something inside him had changed. He didn't see numbers anymore. He saw faces. He saw humanity. The CEO turned to him. "Ethan, what did you learn from your time in Manila? Is there anything we can apply here?" Ethan paused. The room waited. He could feel the skepticism. The quiet impatience of minds trained to move fast, decide faster. He spoke slowly. "Yes," he said. "But it's not something you can put in a spreadsheet." He stood, looking around at the familiar faces of executives who once thought like he did. "We've been chasing efficiency, but we've forgotten empathy. We've built systems so strong that they no longer feel human. In the Philippines, I saw leadership that feels, that listens, that lifts people up instead of wearing them down, and somehow that's what made them unstoppable." Someone chuckled lightly. "Ethan, are you saying feelings can drive a Fortune 500 company?" He smiled gently. "I'm saying humanity can." Silence. For a moment, even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to stop. Then the CEO leaned forward. "So what do you suggest?" Ethan looked out the window. The skyline shimmering in the morning light. "Hire more Filipino leaders," he said simply. Not because of diversity quotas, not because it looks good in reports, but because they understand something we've forgotten. That leadership is about people first. Always. And that was how it began. Over the following months, the company launched a new leadership initiative, modeled not on Western hierarchy, but on Filipino values. They called it Project Bayanihan, named after the Filipino spirit of communal unity. Ethan worked closely with Maria and Joel, who now led cross-continental teams. They restructured communication, encouraged empathy-based management, and trained leaders to build trust before performance. The results were undeniable. Employee retention soared, collaboration increased, burnout dropped. But more importantly, the atmosphere changed. Meetings began with gratitude, not competition. Managers listened more, commanded less. Slowly, the corporation began to breathe again. One morning, while walking through the office, Ethan overheard two young analysts talking. "It feels different now," one said. "It's like people actually care." Ethan smiled quietly and kept walking. Later that year, he was invited to speak at an international business summit in New York. The topic: the future of global leadership. He stood before 1,000 executives from every corner of the world, his notes untouched on the podium. He spoke from the heart. "Not long ago," he began, "I believed leadership was about control, about being the smartest, the strongest, the fastest. But I was wrong. Leadership isn't about how much power you hold. It's about how much humanity you give." He paused, scanning the crowd. If you want to see the future of leadership, look beyond the skyscrapers of New York or the labs of Silicon Valley. Look to a small archipelago in the Pacific, a nation that leads not with ego, but with empathy, where faith and resilience walk hand in hand, where people smile through storms and find joy, even in struggle. He took a deep breath. The Philippines has shown me that the most powerful kind of leadership doesn't shout. It listens. It doesn't demand. It serves. It doesn't divide. It unites. And that, he said, his voice soft but firm, is what the world needs right now. The hall erupted in applause. But for Ethan, the moment wasn't about recognition. It was about realization. He had come full circle, from a man who once doubted to one who now believed. And more than that, he carried within him the very essence of what he'd learned: to lead with heart, to think with purpose, and to build with both. Months later, Ethan returned to Manila for a short visit, this time not for research, but for gratitude. He visited the old office where it all started. The walls were brighter, the laughter louder. Joel was now a regional director, Maria a global vice president. When they saw him, they embraced him like family. "You came back," Maria said warmly. Ethan smiled. "I had to. I never really left." As evening fell, they stood on the rooftop overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered with light, the air thick with the sound of life. Ethan looked out, remembering every moment: the typhoon, the prayers, the laughter, the warmth that had rebuilt his faith in people. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think leadership was about building empires, but now I see it's about building bridges." Maria nodded, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "That's what we Filipinos do best," she said. "We build bridges with heart." Ethan looked at her, and then at the horizon, the place where sea met sky, where east met west, and whispered, "The world just doesn't know it yet." But he knew. And someday, he thought, the world would see what he now understood so clearly: that the Filipino spirit, the blend of compassion and competence, humility and excellence, isn't just shaping teams, it's shaping the future of leadership itself. Because in a divided, weary world, the Philippines stands quietly as proof that greatness doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be kind.